Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the GameDev.tv Community Podcast. I'm your host, KB, and this podcast brings you the audio experience of GameDev.tv. Now, let's get right into the podcast.
Jack Reynolds. I was a game designer on The Last of Us 2, and now I guess I can't really talk about what I'm doing next, but there's a couple of exciting prospects in the mix. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Well, as
And then how'd you get started?
Sorry?
As you're not working in Valve, it might even be The Last of Us 3 then.
Yeah, we don't really at Valve. They don't think they know the number 3 very well.
Aaron, do you know the answer to that?
Just stop.
Yeah, so how did you get started in the game industry?
So I don't know. I was writing a lot. I was in college. I was writing like a lot of like stories and screenplays and stuff like that. And they were bad, and I felt bad. And then I was kind of like, I got broken up with my girlfriend in like 2017, and I was like, I had put down games for a while. I was played games all the time growing up. It was like my entire life. And then, and sort of like in college, I kind of fell out with it a little bit. And then I picked it back up because I was kind of like sad and depressed. And it seemed like it would be like a really good, like avenue to just sort of like relax and blow off some steam. And I played like a lot of the games that people were telling me were great, like a lot of like indie titles.
Mm-hmm.
And I played the first Last of Us actually. And I was like, these games are great. And I feel like I have such a deeper understanding for this than I would like with TV writing or anything like that. And I figured I kind of wanted to give it a shot and see how far I could go. Also, like, I think games in general are a relatively untapped art form, right? Like, the idea of what separates a movie from a game is like the idea of interactivity. And as far as that goes, there's still so many things that can be explored even in that realm. I mean, I only think that like in terms of like the experience of something, we've only really gotten like the experience of like maybe like war, but only in like a fun way even, it's like there's not even like a really there's not that many horrifying war games, maybe horror as well. I don't know, but I think just the idea of how untapped it was as a field, it was really exciting as a prospect. And so that's kind of how I got started. That's when I wanted to be a game designer. I guess after that, my first gig was working as a software engineering intern at Jackbox Games. I don't know if you ever played like, you don't know Jack or Quiplash. Like there's like these little like phone games that connect to a TV, and you can like sort of like everyone will get like different prompts for questions, and people will submit that, and
they're really seen those.
Yeah,
those are really fun.
I love those.
And then after that, I had done a lot of like indie stuff by myself, made some friends, did a lot of game jams, made some preps and stuff, and then I saw the job as a game designer at Naughty Dog, and I applied, and it was, I got to work on the game, which was really cool. Yeah.
That's amazing to be like, hey, I just want to work on games, and boom, Naughty Dog.
Yeah.
We'll go into that.
It's a little surreal for sure.
Yeah. So you had the hard time, like, what were you doing to like get into games? Were you like looking at courses? Were you like, let me just go into like game design school?
So I was at a liberal arts college in Ohio, which it had no game design whatsoever. We had like one game course where we had like a basic sort of Unity thing, but it was very hands off and kind of a lot of people made really bad games because a lot of people didn't really know what they were doing, myself included. So I guess one thing I got to do is I got to take, my parents are from New York, so I got to I took a summer class at NYU, and it was under this indie developer who, like a lot of indie developers have become professors in a lot of these schools, just like sort of like, almost as if you're like a writer who becomes a professor so you can like pay bills while you like work on your own game or book or whatever.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I took some classes with him, and he definitely like made my design brain bigger, as well as like, teach you the basics of, basic game architecture, like basic stuff. So like ray casting and, like input processing, sort of like your basic scripted events, stuff like that. Basic physics, sort of scripting and stuff like that. After that, it was pretty much just like trying to create. I had all of these game ideas that I would come up with, and a lot of it came down to like playing a lot of indie games and like thinking about stuff and kind of being like, oh, that might be an interesting idea for a game, writing it down, and then trying to prototype it in any way I could. And I think the way I kind of learned a lot of these concepts of scripting were because I didn't really know how to articulate an idea programmatically. So when I would have this design idea, and I'd be like, okay, how do I make this in a way that I can add stuff to it later, or if I want to make the scope bigger, I can without like everything coming crashing to a halt. Because that was definitely a problem that I had early on was, I can I have this like idea, and I can pretty much like brute force program the whole thing without any real good architecture. But then if it came to like, okay, well, I want to expand on this little idea now, it was like impossible. So I think that was the kind of things that I were sort of interfacing with, and that gives you like a pretty decent base level in order to like, start putting yourself out there and trying to get game dev jobs. I mean, before I did Naughty Dog and stuff like that, I was doing a lot of like freelance gigs, where it'd be like, someone wants a little mobile game for their thing. It was like advertising almost. And I was really bad. Like I was a really bad scripter at that point. Like I was like up until before.
And when's this?
I was terrible. This would have been like, so I graduated in 2018. So it would have been like winter 2018, early 2019. I was really bad. But people just kind of let you do this thing, and I had a basic idea of how this stuff worked, and the stuff was small that I got to sort of build that. And when they would put me on other teams sometimes with other people, I would get to sort of absorb their code and see how they were doing it. And I guess the other place that was really foundational in order to like learn better programming, game programming and stuff like that, would be game jams. I mean, going up to game jams, I remember I went to NYU. I came into the city because I wanted to do this game jam. It was Global Game Jam 2019. And I came in and I just saw a group of people, and I like found like the most interesting group of people. And they didn't really want me to like hang out with them, but I like kind of brute forced them, and it was like, hey, like let's make
be
game
friends. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of just sort of I just aggressively try to pursue their friendship and pursue their group to be part of Global Game Jam, and they were all indie developers themselves. And they taught me like a huge amount over the next 3 days. We would come in every day and just like script for hours and hours and hours, and make assets like on top of it. And here I am like learning like basic Maya, like for opening Maya for like the third time ever, trying to make like assets because like we have this deadline at Global Game Jam ends after 72 hours or something. So we had this deadline that we had to like put in, and that type of stuff, like that high intensity sort of under the fire stuff, is great because it forces you to. I was somebody that very much likes to sit on things and go like, what if I could make it better this way, or what if I could make it better that way? In this case, it's just like, you don't have. Am I allowed to swear on this? No, right?
No, but I mean, if you do, it's fine. I edit it out.
You're just like able to. It's just like screw it. you don't have any time. You have to push it out the door, and game jams are dope for that type of thing. Yeah.
No, I bet, dude. It's like burning the boats. Just like go, make it, see what happens, and then improve on it later. Don't worry about it now.
Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
and also having stuff done, right? Like having stuff done is so important for you to look back at your own, like where you are now versus then, and it can be a real benchmark, because at the time a lot of the stuff I thought that I made was terrible, and in some it definitely was terrible, but like, you can start to give yourself a pat on the back because some of those early ideas were actually good ones.
Mm-hmm. And actually, we did a podcast episode a while ago, but we talked about like don't make one huge long game like WoW. Make like the smaller games because then you learn more.
Yeah.
And this is a great example. Yeah.
And you can't make WoW. Like no one person can make WoW. Like
Exactly. Don't make WoW.
I feel like we always come back to this.
I do it for you, Ricardo.
I think there's something to be said about the whole "don't make WoW" thing. I think that a lot of it is just that's kind of the scope that people want to embrace. Is I want to be able to do everything. I want to make a massive game that has all of the things in it, and I think that's definitely noble as far as intentions and goals are, right?
Yeah.
Aim for the moon, but after you've learned a little bit, realize that it's a lot of work to get there.
For sure. I think especially one thing I tried to do early on was make games that weren't just like genres of other things. Like I remember I'm right now looking at a place, like I had to learn a lot of like FPS design and game programming sort of paradigms. And a lot of people that were on like Unity Answers and stuff, they're like, I am trying to make Call of Duty, and like, how do I make kill streaks, and how do I make like radar and stuff like that?
Everybody has that thing that they find interesting and they want to know how to make it.
Yeah, exactly. And they kind of just want to like make something or try their best shot at making like a AAA, like huge budget game. And that's like impossible. Yeah, it's like impossible. Like you're one person and you're still learning. Like if I were making something and I was starting out, I would be trying to think of an idea that sounds interesting that's scoped really, really small. That's not WoW. That's like, what if it was like WoW, but it was only but you could only have the map tool, and it's only like I guess that's not WoW. That's a completely different game. But no, like it's an idea of like trying to take one tiny part of WoW that stands out to you as interesting, and sort of trying to expand on that rather than trying to make WoW.
Or maybe take like a favorite game, like maybe Last of Us, and just make the Ellie sequence, a little bit of it. Maybe the beginning part, just that small portion.
Instead of trying to think of this like massive, try to create all the systems and recreate them, just create one system that is good enough that you can sort of like build a basic idea around. And prototype and get into the hands of other people. I mean, that's really what's important. The earlier that you can show people your work, the better.
No, I agree.
Yeah, and some of the best indie games are like a single concept just done really well. Great and fast and stuff.
Yeah, I played this game Tacoma, which is literally just like this sort of like ghost character in BioShock, but just like expanded as a whole game mechanic, and I honestly think if you're starting out, like make a walking simulator. I love walking simulators, and I think they are like really great because you could just like you could get like the Unity standards assets, slap a first person character controller on, and just like get some basic scripting behaviors in, and they're pretty easy to set up. I said that might be a hot take. I love walking simulators. That's just me.
No, I do too.
That's really interesting. I mean, even just as something as simple as walking around is fundamental to how a game is perceived by people that are playing it.
Yeah, for sure.
The small details matter.
Yeah. It was like a way for me to learn level design concepts, right? Just like having an interesting layout that you can walk around in.
Like Death Stranding, everybody was like, "Oh, it's a walking simulator," but there's something about that game that's just captures you, and you're like, "I want to explore. I want to walk around."
I love Death Stranding.
Same. A lot of people I talk to like hate it. horrible, worst story. I'm like, you didn't really experience what I experienced. I don't know
I
what
think
happened.
you're both right and wrong to love or hate Death Stranding. I
Yeah,
don't think there's a wrong. If you feel no way about it, that's the wrong answer.
there you go.
You
Yeah.
either have to love it or hate it. I feel like,
Mhm.
yeah, Death Stranding is really cool.
Now let's go back to when you were in college. So, did you learn programming first and then move into game design?
Yeah, I had a programming degree because my mom made me. My mom was like, you can either take econ, math, or computer science, and because she was worried about me getting a job afterwards, which is like, God bless her. But I picked up programming, didn't really like it, and then when it was only when I started, thinking about it in terms of games that I really started to enjoy it. And I think that's just, I guess, for anyone that's trying to learn programming, and they or like people are like, oh, I need to learn how to code, I need to learn this. But honestly, I think you should think of coding as like a paintbrush or some sort of tool. It's not like a be all end all. It's like, it's got to be a thing that you utilize to get what you want out of something. So like for me, I wanted to make games, so coding was like a tool in order for me to do that. Some people want to create like artistic fractal, like 3D math stuff, and I have a friend who does that. I had a friend who used his programming to solve his math homework in college, and like these are all great ways to sort of like utilize programming, right? As opposed to just like the idea of learning how to code just to learn how to code. You're not gonna, at least
It kind of reminds me of like learning like Spanish just to learn Spanish.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
then you start learning everything, and then you don't learn what you actually need.
I mean, it's a profile thing, I guess. Like some people like codes overall, like myself.
That's just my experience, right? I guess I'm just talking about more about the people that are on the outside of code, and that they have like a philosophy degree, and they're like, well, I need to learn how to code now because I want to get a job or whatever.
I got you. Yeah. Well, there might be some very thoughtful programmers.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
Yeah.
the answer to life.
So yeah, that's kind of how I got into game programming, but I'm glad I did. It's I love design coding. It's like my favorite thing.
Now, what advice would you give aspiring programmers?
Yeah, I would say, I guess that's what I would say is that, find what you wanted to use coding for and do that, because that's the way you're going to get better. Like for me, I was able to, some people like, coding puzzles and the idea of beating those is like really exciting. And for me, it was just like, I wanted to make these games and I didn't know how to do it. So getting better at programming and learning like these programming fundamentals was like necessary in order to move forward. And that's what was a huge motivator for me, like getting better at game programming and stuff like that. And that's how also, you pick up those paradigms like state-based scripting and decision trees and stuff like that. Those are all things that I learned or I came across because I was like, I want to make this thing, but I don't really know how.
You can definitely tell how much of a nerd somebody is based on the kinds of things that they find interesting in programming. Take me, for example. I enjoy writing containers.
Love.
Yep, tells me all the time.
That's God's work right there.
Yeah.
I really, really enjoy writing containers. I don't know why.
Oh man.
Yeah, I love writing data structures and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I love just like having really clean. I made last week I made a curve tool and I felt like a big brain genius. It was just like the best feeling ever because now I have this thing that I can use forever on everything. I think that's like also maybe one thing that I would say, if you're like good at game programming, one thing that I wish I had started doing earlier was like starting to build tools for myself. Lucas Pope, who made Obra Dinn and Papers, Please at Naughty Dog. He worked at Naughty Dog before he became an indie developer, and he was a tools programmer there. And he made like all of the sort of tools that we still use at Naughty Dog. He, like, my understanding of him, and I don't really know him. I don't know him personally at all, but my understanding is that one of the things that he's done to save a lot of time with his sort of personal games that he's released as an indie developer is a lot of like great tools that he's used for himself, and that saves a lot of time.
What was his name again?
Lucas Boat.
No, I think that's a smart thing to do, because then it just saves you tons of time. You can also use that for like asset stores and like be like, hey, look.
Yeah. If it's good enough, you can upload it and make a profit off of it. For sure. You know,
I find that one of the hardest things that when you're getting started is to make some money out of it. You have no experience, so you can't get like paid positions. So you're either someone's slave or making assets. So
I mean, there was a bit of
that poison.
There was definitely a bit of that too when I was starting. You know, I mean, you get these freelance contracts of people that were paying me like, you know, like $12 an hour and wanted something done in a weekend, and those contracts exist and they suck, but at the same time, they also, I feel like the expectations aren't as high. So it's like okay for you to be like an intermediate game dev and take these sort of contracts on. Like you don't have to be like a ridiculous game programmer. You don't have to be like a AAA level game programmer to start picking up these early contracts. Yeah.
No, I think it's a good thing to become aware of, because I don't think everybody's like, oh, I gotta make my game and then that's it. It's like, no, you can, even for me, it's like you can start doing these freelancing things, push yourself, and then where do you go to do this freelancing? Is it just like Fiverr or?
I had some, I can't remember what the site was actually. Upwork was a good place where I got a lot of stuff early on. When I met this guy who one of the people that I worked on with the Global Game Jam thing that I met those guys at NYU. One of them, he was working. He was working as a freelancer, and he was kind of the guy that set me up. And you know, I kept thinking at the time, you know, I was like, I'm too bad to do this. I'm too bad to take on these freelancing contracts. But this guy who, you know, he definitely was better than me at programming, but he wasn't like miles and miles better where I couldn't understand his code. He had been taking like all of these freelancing gigs, and every month he'd be getting another gig, and I'd be like, damn, like I want to start doing that as well, and start, you know, making some degree of profit that I can sustain myself. And it was still like about the same amount of money as I would make as like a bartender, but I was able to like, you know, buy myself foods once in a while and you know, go out for drinks with my friends every once. I mean, I was living with my parents, so I didn't have to pay rent, fortunately. But you know, it was some degree of profit, which was great.
What were the kinds of things that people were asking you to do for these, you know, over a weekend type things?
Yeah, so it would be like anything like, you know, using Unity's like AR stuff so that like people could get like renderings of their artwork that they'd be like some sort of like textured FBX model, but they wanted to see it inside of like a space. And like, I don't know if you've ever done AR.
Yep, actually have built a scene for HoloLens. Yeah.
It's like it's like pretty straightforward stuff, especially if you're not like having the things doing anything. If they're just being like rendered in a space, pretty straightforward to do.
Single glass. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, to be just like stuff like a really, really basic 2D mobile game that's like some sort of like I remember one time I made tic-tac-toe, like literally made tic-tac-toe and just set up and they just gave me a bunch of assets and then I made it for them, and I just really set it up. And you can like find all that stuff online, and I'm pretty sure I did just like straight up rip the algorithms off and just like used it because I was like it's Sunday night, I have to turn this in the morning, like let's go.
Yeah, why not?
But yeah, I mean, like these right, like these types of things are yeah, they're kind of like will burn you at both ends, but they're also a great way to get early work. And you know, it did help me during my Naughty Dog interview, like these types of things where I could say like, oh yeah, I've done this thing and this thing. And one thing that I learned on this one job was beneficial during my technical interview because it was sort of just like an extrapolation of that question I had already solved. And you know, those things kind of do, they do add up, and it does get you do get a lot of work fast, and you do get better quickly, because like we kind of were talking about, right? When someone else is paying you to do it, or trying to get you to do it, you do push, you make solutions to problems, and you make them quickly. And that's really good for someone like me, who will literally just like redo something 4 different ways just to like make it a little bit better, and get anxious about the idea of ever submitting it and just like letting it hang in your desktop forever. And I've definitely have done that. So yeah.
And then did you ever have a bad experience where they were like, this was not what we wanted?
I think right before I had gotten a lot of freelance work, I had taken an unpaid internship, which was cool, but it was also like, I hate having unpaid internships, and I'm not telling people that they shouldn't, but it definitely it stings a lot, because it was kind of a mess, and I was pretty much doing what I would have been doing for myself, but for someone else. Does that make sense?
And not
I
getting paid for it.
Yeah. And but I got to throw it on my resume. Like, that's the only thing that I got to really get out of it. But that was the worst experience. But like, you know, it also did kick off my freelance work. So yeah, I don't have a lot of negative things to say about it, just besides the fact that it stinks to not get compensated for, like, I guess, the effort when you're not doing it for yourself.
How long was that internship?
It was like a month and a half,
That's
2
not
months.
that bad.
Yeah. I was able to pick up some stuff pretty quickly after that, and it was a combination of like connections. So like, you know, going to these game jams, meeting people. You know, one guy who I talked about before, who was doing freelance work when they needed someone else, he was like, oh, I know a guy, and then they hit me up, right? So, you know, talking to people is really important, getting your name out there, going to your local game dev meetups, and also and I went to a bunch of those, and some of them were like completely unfruitful, and there were people that, like, you know, had never even like heard of Unity or any game engine that were showing up to these. But then there was also, you know, people that were like, oh, I'm looking for XY person. So there's that, and then there's sort of, you know, and working, and that's all you can do. Those are really the only 2 factors in order to like kind of get a job, is just to like try to meet with as many people as you can that are interested in the field that you're in, and then just work on stuff. And, you know, eventually I think it's like a spark happens, and you get those interviews.
Is that how you got the Naughty Dog one, or did you just apply to that one?
So Naughty Dog, I was scouring through my alumni network, and one of the writers of Uncharted 4 and on The Last of Us went to my school, but he went to my school in like the 90s, like it was a while ago. But I cold messaged him on LinkedIn being like, hello sir, like I am
oh my god, don't make me feel old. I graduated in 93.
I was born in 93.
Oh jeez.
I was like,
get off my lawn.
I hit him up, and I was like, hello sir, I'm an aspiring game designer, like, you know, could I ask you some questions? And I guess it went well enough, because he told me that, you know, there was a scripter position open, which I had known about, but I was too afraid to apply. Like, I was so convinced of how bad I was that I was too afraid to even apply. But when when Josh, who was the writer that I had reached out to, he was like, you know, give it a shot. I was thinking, okay, well, you know what, like, if that's, it was a sign of confidence. He didn't really know me, but like, that was all I needed. I needed just that little push to apply. And I mentioned that I had spoken to him in my cover letter when I sent it in, and I definitely think that had to have something to do with why I got the interview in the first place. And then that's that's pretty much how it happened. That's how I think I got the first interview.
Wow. See, there you go. Build a network, reach out to people. Don't be afraid. That's another one thing. Like you were mentioning being afraid. It's like just try it. You don't know what's gonna happen. All they can say is no.
Yeah, every single round of the interviews that I had for Naughty Dog, and even still to this day now, I was convinced that it was my last one and that I bombed it. And I was like, yeah, there's no way. I remember calling, I had the technical interview at Naughty Dog, and I called my girlfriend after, and I was like, I got pretty far, but there's no way I got past that one. Like I learned a lot from it. Like that was great, but I bombed it. And then they called me back, and I just remember being like, oh my God, what do I do now? I was so shocked. But yeah. And don't be afraid to apply to stuff. And you're probably better than you think you are.
Yeah, well, here's something that's important to remember is that somebody who's an expert at this kind of stuff that's in a management position is going to be able to assess your skill at something way better than you can.
Yeah.
So definitely apply, because they'll know whether they can use you or not to do what they want you to do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, and even if they don't, even if you're better or worse than they say you are, in the case that you do get like hired for these positions or you don't, I mean, they're really learning experience both ways. Like I said, even thinking that I bombed the interview, I learned so much that was my first like actual technical interview, like strictly in the first place. And I had learned so much stuff just from the kinds of questions they were asking, that I was like, writing them down and going like, okay, like these are the stuff that I should go back and look at and try to review and try to learn, and like go and watch these GDC talks. I remember, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, I remember when they asked me a certain question at Naughty Dog that had corresponded to one of their own games. I remember just like immediately after like going on GDC and like trying to like learn about what, how that mechanic actually did work. And that type of stuff was a great learning experience. And I felt way more confident even thinking that I had bombed, just knowing that like, okay, the puzzle pieces are kind of coming together a little bit tomorrow. Like these are the things that I have to learn in order to be able to get a job at these AAA roles. So yeah, I mean, I think just apply and go to these meetings and get those interviews, and even whether you succeed or like don't get the job, they're both great experiences and you learn a crap ton. Yeah,
you win or you learn.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing's actually even true with the job.
Yeah.
What did they call it? The Peter Principle, I think. That's you rise to the level of your failure.
About the Peter Principle.
Yeah.
What was it like working? Is it like really different from working on your own games? What was the process?
Yeah, totally.
Naughty Dog.
Naughty Dog is great. I mean, there are a group of people that have such a high degree of attention to detail and polish in the way that I had never even really conceived of, right? And that's why their games are so good, is that they, like, if it works in the best case scenario, that is like 10% of the work. You have to make sure that it works in like the worst possible case of scenario. When you try to do the most, like if you try to break the game, you have to make sure that the game will still not break and push back and be like a whole experience. And that sort of degree of like perfectionism is something that I really admired, and I still kind of carry with me, and sort of open my mind to. I think the other side of it is that you also, one of the game directors kind of told me this, is that like you get like assets of the gods. I mean, like the game, the stuff that you get, the character models, and for someone that's like an indie developer like me that was making like these crappy little block match things in my basement at my mom's house, and then all of a sudden like you're working with like a fully character rigged model and like dynamic lighting and like these beautiful particle effects and crazy like level layouts that these people that have been doing it for 15 years that have been the top of their field working on. It's like it's just it's like your mind is going like for everything.
I bet you're like, what?
And I just remember just being like, oh my God. I remember thinking I'm gonna get fired like every single day for like the first 3 months. I'm like, they're gonna see through it and I'm gonna be fired. And it didn't happen. I didn't get fired, fortunately, but
I felt like that for about the first 3 months that I was working at Microsoft.
yeah,
It was a 6-month interview process to get hired there. I went through like 5 different technical interviews and finally got hired there, and I felt exactly like that for the first at least 3 months that I was there. I was just like, what did I get myself into?
like I'm screwed.
Right? Like I don't know any of this stuff. Like my first engagement with they do what are called shadow engagements, where you just go, with somebody else who does your job, to a customer to solve a problem or whatever.
For sure.
Yeah, and I'm sitting there watching the guy do, what he's doing. He's sitting there looking at SQL database backends, optimizing queries, looking at indexes and execution plans, and I'm just like, Mike, am I expected to be able to do that? And he's like, yeah, this is your job, and I'm like, I have never done anything. I don't even know what you're doing right now. You're doing something in SQL,
I remember they wanted us to like basically have me set up a cutscene to like, because it's very like there's no real documentation at Naughty Dog, and they use proprietary software for the most part. So a lot of the times you have to like ask people, these things, and
who's the SME for that?
And it's just, I remember I had to like set up this like in-game cutscene, and it was just like a way to like get prepared for how the job will essentially work. And I remember just I couldn't do it, and I was like, oh my God, I'm totally gonna get fired, like I'm done. But they then it's you look at it 10 months later, and something that had seemed so daunting to you at the start is now like you eat it for breakfast, and it's a great feeling. So yeah, I guess keep at it, I suppose. And if you're feeling really uncomfortable and you feel out of your depth, then that's like good, I think. I think it's a good place to be.
It means you're learning.
Yeah, because it's like for me, like up until that point, it was, I think I knew the bare minimum in order to get a job at Naughty Dog, and when I did, I think it was just like very much a baptism by fire, and I had to adapt really quickly, and it was really great because I did learn so much. I learned more than I possibly thought that I could in like the span of like 10 months, which is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, when you get out of school, you're used to like this rhythm of learning and a pretty slow speed, and then you get to a real job, and like people are just very good at what they do.
It's cranked at like 100 miles per hour, as opposed to like you learn maybe one new thing a week. You're like learning stuff every day, 3 times a day. But that's why we do game dev, right? Like we want to be constantly fascinated by the prospect of new and exciting experiences, and some of that goes with new problems in order to solve with our sort of tools that we have.
Mm-hmm. Now, what advice would you give for someone who's in that 3-month period? Would you tell them to like learn more courses, to ask more questions?
Like the 3-month period,
early
on
in their, if
they have their first job? I think asking questions is essential. If you don't know something, I think I read and looking up resources. So one thing that I was doing as I was trying to break into the game industry is I was looking up a lot of these resources of devs who have already broken into the game industry and reaching out. One person that was really essential was Katie Kyronis, who I think she's like a narrative designer for Riot. And she had all of these like sort of blog posts about like breaking into the game industry. And she had one that I looked at a lot actually, that says like after you've landed your first gig, like this is sort of like how sort of conduct yourself in the workplace, but also like how to sort of make sure you're doing the best job you can. And one of the things that I saw was that it's like if you don't really understand how to do something within 15 minutes, go and ask for help. And that process, that idea of that was really like sort of foreign to me. It's like 15 minutes. Like if I can't figure that out in 15 minutes, like, I should be able to sit with the problem for longer than that. No, I remember I would get up out of my chair every day and I would go talk to the other designers, and I was definitely pretty annoying at first, but it was really helpful because the more I bothered people early, and the more I bothered people early, the more I learned, and the less likely that I would sort of bother them later. And you can sort of mitigate the annoyance of that a bit by being really gracious and thankful, and saying like, and being like a kind and easy to work with person. And most of the time they know you're new. Like that's another thing, is that everyone knows you're new. Like they know that you're going to take some time to get brought up to speed, especially when you're not using like standard tools. So don't be afraid to like get up out of your chair. And that's the best thing you can do, is to be out of your chair and asking questions. If you're just staring at your screen, like sort of like slack-jawed and fearful,
Yeah.
helping nobody.
You're like, you okay over there?
Yeah,
Like,
you're helping nobody.
I could do this.
For sure.
Oh, man. Now, after doing that interview, is there anything you could recommend for people to like prepare themselves for a type of interview, like for game designer? Like what type of course, what resource to look at, what videos to watch?
So there's a couple of things that I love. Glassdoor will post interviews of people that have taken the interview, and they'll sometimes have the responses for all the interview questions that were asked. And I will not say where, but in one of the places that I interviewed, all of the questions that were posted were the ones that were all actually asked. It was like I had seen the test ahead of time. And that was great because it gave me, I got to prep those answers and also kind of gauge an idea of what I might be asked as I'm applying for stuff. I think doing technical, so I can only speak as like a script designer. One thing that's really important as a script designer is to know your like basic 3D math. So like dot product, cross product, vector addition, subtraction, scalar multiplication.
Do you need to know how to do it, or you just need to know how to use it?
How to use it. So like no one's going to ask you, or at least in my experience, no one has really asked me, how do you use the dot product for things? It was more like, you have a character who, like you want to apply more damage to a character if you're shooting at them from in front of them than if you're shooting at them from behind. How would you like sort of solve that problem?
Calculate the radians between 0.5 and 1.5.
Yeah. So like that's
right.
That's product
on
problem,
the
right?
Z plane, yeah.
Just like you understand how those things are used,
right, and calculate the dot product of the X. Yeah, right. Interesting.
One thing I
shut up.
I mean, so for me, like just looking up problems all the time. I'm currently in the process of interviewing at various places right now, and one thing I've been doing was just sort of taking those individual game mechanics and trying to script them in a really simple version, like no asset, unpolished, looks like poop, but the programmatic way that it could be structured. I
do the same thing, but I just do them with like straight up console programs, just to prove the logic, basically.
Exactly, and then that way, when you are asked about it, whether it's you have to actually script it or it's sort of verbal, because a lot of my interviews have been verbal, where you're just kind of going through like almost like a pseudocode that you can kind of like list out. Having that sort of experience where you've already done the thing is like a great way to sort of answer the question, like the question down because you've already literally implemented it. So
that must feel really good. Just go in like, oh, I've done this. Hey, this is how you do it. Yeah.
When in the interview in question, I remember I got through the first 5 questions in like 2 minutes because I had already done all of them before, and I literally had prepared them all. So yeah, Yeah, I would stick to Glassdoor. I would say just try to find technical problems to things. Because as a designer, as a script designer, you're going to be asked design questions like systems design. How would you make a design better? Stuff like what happens if you take scissors out of rock, paper, scissors? Like so general game design questions. But there will also be like these sort of 3D math questions, sort of basic data structure creation, basic sort of optimization, big O runtimes. So like more general programming principles. I've only had those sort of like sorting algorithm problems and big O runtime questions once, but it has definitely been 3D math. Like knowing the dot product has been something that has come up. Some sort of dot product related problem has been a thing on every single interview I've had, technically. So that highly recommend just knowing your 3D.
So
math.
just make sure you know what the dot product does.
Yeah, just the dot.
Figure out the dot.
We don't care about anything else as long as you know how that works. Then you're
and the money stats flowing. Cash out.
Yeah, one thing
outside.
One thing I found pretty nice when I was preparing for my interviews to move to Europe was I watched a ton of videos about like interviewing in general, and a lot of the time they go into like not only what they want to hear but why they ask certain questions.
Yeah.
I also find that pretty good because then you know where to steer the conversation to.
Yeah, of course. It's weird because it's like you do get a lot of partial credit for just understanding the things, even if your calculations are wrong. I had a technical interview really recently where my brain was frozen because it was my first time whiteboarding in front of people. And I remember I was frozen and they were like, well, like, what do you think the problem is? And I was like listing all the logic in my head, and they were like, that's right. And then I looked back at the thing and I whiteboard and I just had something wrong fundamentally. And I erased it. And I was like, oh, well, that's what it is. Because I worked through it in my head, realizing that my logic out loud was different than what was on the board. And I ended up, getting to the next round of that interview, even though I, again, thought I had tanked it because it wasn't clean, right? Like I was so anxious that I was messing up a lot of these simple steps in my head. But when I was explaining the logic and explaining why I was doing X, Y, and Z thing, my logic was sound, and that was what they were looking for. They want, yeah.
Yeah, they want to know how you arrive at solutions, not exactly the solution.
Yeah.
Anyone can just sort of study and memorize answers to questions, but you have to have the sort of theoretical knowledge of these things.
That's the nature of programming, is that it's a creative process where you're solving, for a bunch of math problems, essentially.
Yeah, for sure.
In a lot of ways, that's really all you're doing.
Yeah, totally.
Ultimately, that's all the computer really does. It just, adds numbers really fast. Really, 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 really fast.
Now back to the math. What would you recommend they should use to study? Should it be solving a bunch of problems, be watching a bunch of videos? Because that can get tricky.
Yeah, so one thing that I had was this book right here, 3D Math Primer for Graphics and Game Development. I bought this. I looked online what was the best game dev game math book, and this was one that was literally just math for games. There's a YouTube series that's called Math for Game Development, where some guy does Khan Academy style whiteboarding on a computer, which is great. I only, and again, learning these things in a sort of theoretical sense is fine. Understanding oh, this is what a vector does, and this is what happens when you add two vectors together. But when you start, it's not going to make sense until you start implementing it and start thinking about it geometrically. And so I guess when you're trying to wrap your head around these math stuff, don't be afraid, at least for me, don't be afraid to just bust open a game engine and start thinking about ways that you can apply this, formula to some sort of game dev problem that you could have.
Okay. So basically, just make a game and then figure out
Yeah,
what you
make
need
stuff.
to use for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just
Just
make
make a
stuff.
game. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Make
gotta
Yeah, just
say,
make WoW.
Yeah.
yeah, I gotta say, Khan Academy has a pretty good linear algebra course as well.
They do, yeah. The Khan Academy has everything. Like you can't go literally just
It
Google
doesn't.
search whatever you're. It doesn't.
Sadly,
Okay.
it doesn't.
It doesn't.
I'm at
But
the exact point where it doesn't right now.
it's a pretty good start to just literally type in the problem that you're having and then end it with Khan Academy into Google, and you'll likely find
Yes.
a video on that, or at least I did for a lot of the stuff that I was having early on.
I'm pretty sure the guy who does the math for games online, he's like Carlos or something, right? Carlos. Let me see. Oh no, it's Jorge Rodriguez.
Jorge Rodriguez, yep.
Yeah, that's really good. I've watched some of those. And they
Yeah.
were like, it was like tons. Yeah, that's a great place to go. So you can check that out. Now, you did creative writing, right? Did that help a lot with doing game design?
Yeah, I mean, I came up with a lot of cool game ideas because I was like a writer, and I suppose I think one thing that's really important for game design is the idea of the experience, or like one thing that like the game dev sort of academics like to throw around is like ludology and like, or like ludonarrative, things like that. And Ludo kind of just stands for like feel and touch and interactivity. And I think for me, game design was sort of the idea of writing something, but through the experience of interactivity, through like the feel of it, right? As opposed to like this sort of nebulous idea of like, what is fun, quote unquote. It was more like, what can this gameplay bring the experience of, whether it's the idea of being distracted, or the idea of being like these sort of like human emotions of like loneliness or like fear. I mean, fear is like a great one that's horror games, right? Or like trying to sort of take human experiences, which is what a lot of writing is, and sort of put that into gameplay. And I think that is sort of how they informed each other, I guess, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. Because I feel with a lot of games now, like Last of Us is a great game where you feel a lot of emotion.
Mm.
And then there are some games where it's just like, you don't feel like either the developers have passion or they just wrote something to write something. Like, it's not like, what are we trying to feel out of this moment? Like, God of War does a great job of that. Witcher does a great job of that. But then there's some other games I'm just like, I didn't really feel it.
Some of the things that I've been really interested in is sort of like systemic gameplay that gives you the sort of experience that feels like it was a scripted event. Like one game I was obsessed with last year was Hitman 2. I mean, like Hitman 2 is just Hitman 2 is amazing. I mean, the idea of just like all these little systems of like putting on disguises and like putting a bomb in like a cupboard and then like leaving the building and like these sort of things. It's like these things that feel like it was written by somebody, but it's just you interacting with the systems of the game, which is just like that experience is like super exciting. And so I guess that's what I'm thinking about a lot right now, right? Is like the idea of how do we bring narrative entirely through systemic gameplay. And I guess another game that does that amazingly is Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild totally has all these great little unique systems, and you like there's little experiences like when you light grass on fire, it causes an updraft that you can use to shoot your paraglider in there. And
wow.
Yeah, those are just more. I think those are more in the case of Breath of the Wild. It's more fun, kinetic gameplay systems as opposed to like narrative systems. If I could make the division like with Hitman, but they're both. That's a lot what I'm thinking about right now for sure. Emotional experience through gameplay is sort of my core motto.
I like that. It goes with the player experience that you were talking about.
Yeah.
What do you want the player to experience? Now, what would you say is more important, hard work or talent? What sets you apart?
What? That's a tough one. I don't think I mean, I definitely worked hard when I was at Naughty Dog, and I think I worked hard before. I think what made me get where I wanted to be was just like eagerness and a fear and like a sort of not being afraid to just throw myself at groups of people that I wanted to be involved in. So I don't think I was particularly talented. I mean, I think I'm pretty good at design, but I don't think I was particularly talented. I know I wasn't good at programming, and I worked pretty hard, but a lot of the time I didn't even really know how to work properly. So I couldn't say that I worked efficiently or well, but was really eager, and I got to talk to a lot of people that were a little more grounded in what was going on and had a good handle on it, and that allowed me to like sort of go back to the drawing board and say like, okay, well, what do I need to know now? So I think the eagerness is what made me
Enthusiasm
yeah,
makes up for a lot of lack of skill.
And that's the thing, man. I mean, don't be afraid to be enthusiastic or wag your tail, like, you know, like people love that. I think that's why I got.
Ooh. Tell me about what you know how to do. Sweet.
I think that stuff was when I was I had my interview with the game directors of Naughty Dog, and I remember it was a tough interview, and I just remember that I was just super. I remember I just had to keep being enthusiastic because I was so really passionate about the game, and I wanted to talk about why I loved games and why I loved The Last of Us and what were my favorite moments of The Last of Us. And I was, you know, I think those types of emotions come through in the interview. I mean, everyone wants to work with someone that believes in the product that they're making.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, like, you could just do that, for example, with the games being made. It's like, are they passionate about it? Because if they are, you can feel that while you're playing. You're like, oh, attention to detail. Everything just feels like they cared. Even with food, like, I love cooking food and stuff. It's like the same thing. If you don't make it with like care, it just doesn't come out the same.
Not gonna come out as good. Yeah, that's why I'm bad at making food.
Oh man, come on, it's not that hard.
I suck.
Oh no, I love it.
I make some mean scrambled eggs though, and that's
really.
Oh,
I'm making like Chef Ramsay. I've been practicing.
I mean, with the scrambled eggs, I know how to not get shell in it.
Get some basil in there, some garlic.
Ooh, now we're talking.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on, guys, you're making me hungry.
So what was it like working on the game? How did you feel? Were you like,
oh, man,
I made it?
Yeah.
Or is it just the beginning of your story?
I don't know. I remember being anxious most of the time, honestly, because it was such a big deal for me working on it, and you know, like I said, for a long time it felt like it was over my head. I don't think I've made it, and by any stretch of the word. I think it was a great experience, and I've learned so much, but I also don't really know anything. There's so much more that I want to know, and you really get the sense that I think there are people that have worked for 15 years and still don't know everything. You know, like there's so much to know, and this field is ever evolving, and there are new ways to make games that we never even thought possible. I mean, one game that I've been really into is Warzone lately, and the idea of a battle royale, like I couldn't even imagine that in like the era of like a PS2, like in PS or like even like Halo 1, like Blood Gulch days. Like I never could conceive the idea of like 150 people in a huge world interconnected with like just people battling nonstop. The idea of a game is ever evolving. I completely forgot the question.
Where is it? Oh no, it was the
Oh, have I made it? Yeah.
Yeah, have you made it?
No, I'm excited. I'm excited. I think there's never been a better time to be a game developer than right now. And it seems like we're on the precipice of a lot of new things happening. And I think where we kind of had this sort of renaissance of if this were like the movies in like the 1940s, 1950s era. I think this is the kind of era that we're approaching. Like, people know what a game is. People know how to make games. There's sort of standards of like how games are made, but like the conventions are going to get blown open, and the way that we expect things to get made. I mean, I look at a game like Outer Wilds, and I was like, this game broke all the rules, and it's great, and it was made by like 15 people. Like Undertale, and then there's like stuff that comes out like Undertale, which is like a game where when there's in AAA like a sort of nuclear arms race to have like the best graphics and like the best cleanest gameplay. You have like Undertale, which was made by literally one dude that like uses like Earthbound looking like assets and is considered one of the biggest games of the year. Like, it doesn't, like, the door is sort of wide open in some aspects, right?
I think you're absolutely right about the next evolution for games. I think we're just about at that point, and I think a lot of that is also, because of the foundational technology, the hardware that we have is starting to get to that level of capability too.
Yeah, I mean, we've had like the movie game for like 10 years now,
right?
Like sort of Uncharted 2, Last of Us, like era of games, and I think those are going to definitely be around for a little while longer. But I also think things are going to shift more towards the sort of Breath of the Wild, the Hitman 2 sort of like narrative through systemic gameplay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And probably those things will coexist, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think a big part of that, from my perspective, is just that, the studios have realized that they're never going to be able to produce enough content for the players, no matter what they do. And so there's value in procedurally generated content, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially
if you invest in the system that creates the content rather than just static content.
Yeah, if you're... Sorry, go ahead.
Like YouTube, you just get something to work for you instead of having to create stuff.
Yeah. I mean... Also, like, yeah, if you're an indie person, procedurally generated content is great. I mean, another game that was one of my favorite games of last year was Risk of Rain 2, and I put like 50 hours into that, which was literally made by two kids that had graduated college in like 2016 or something, and they're being published by Gearbox. Like, it's amazing. Like, and the game has like a huge amount of players. I like I say that, like, I think even the fabric of the conventions that we have are sort of in flux. There's so many new ways that we can make games that we haven't even really considered yet.
Yeah, it's especially with the new VR, AR stuff coming out, like Minecraft Earth. You could just completely make the whole world your game.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I love, I put a lot of time into actually, was VR chat. Like, I think VR chat is like one of the coolest, most unique experiences ever. Just in the way I would do this thing where I would pick these random worlds that like had like one or two people and just like explore it and try to see like other people. And that kind of has a narrative in itself, right? But it's not anything that's written. It's just sort of through interacting with the systems of the application.
Yeah. One of Will Wright's masterclasses, he talks about if you make the game itself like a tool or like a toolbox, and they can make their own stories out of the tools you gave them, then they have an endless way of making their own stories and content that can post it out there, and your game can basically be an endless stream of fun because there's no limited, like, it's whatever the player wants to create.
Yeah, why do you think Minecraft is a gold mine?
Yeah, it was one of his masterclass. Yeah, it was just because he made The Sims. He was like, the game.
Yeah, Will Wright. Yeah.
Yeah, you make your own family, make your own story. You decide what's going to happen. I'm just going to give you the tools to play your game.
Yeah, Minecraft is probably the greatest game of all time.
Yeah. There's like really no point. Now there's a story we fight the dragon, but like, do whatever you want. And that just makes for endless fun.
Yeah, it's not my favorite game, but it's definitely probably like, the idea of it is so impressive, and it's 10 years old, and it doesn't ever seem to stop being interesting, which is great. Like, how many games can be said about that?
I spent way too long building a castle in that game. I'm proud of it, but it's
Think about it. Like 2007, we had like one of the biggest releases was like Crisis. What was Crisis' biggest selling point? Was pretty and had good physics, right?
Yeah.
Then you go like 3-4 years into the future, you have the game of the year is Minecraft, like a blocky, chunky thing, but it's infinite gameplay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just nuts.
What's one of your favorite games and why?
Oh, I wrote this down. I have a bunch. I wanted to make sure I got these down. Okay. In no particular order, I love What Remains of Edith Finch, Divinity, Original Sin 2, Hitman 2, which I talked about, Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild, Halo 3 ODST, The Beginner's Guide, Baldur's Gate 2, Oblivion, Earthbound, and Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the first Modern Warfare. And Call of Duty 4, yeah. And also the original Deus Ex is great. And then the Beginner's Guide by Davey Reedon, that one's great too.
Did you ever play Detroit Become Human?
Sorry?
Did you ever play Detroit Become Human?
I started it. I haven't gotten that far into it yet. I keep trying to. I'm waiting for my girlfriend to come around and play it with me because I've been trying to find good games to play with her, and that seems like a good one. But it's on my list for sure.
Yeah, that was a great one. Yeah, you'll love it. What were you saying, Aaron?
Nothing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I could talk about any one of those. You want to just pick a random one?
Yeah. Do one that like nobody knows a lot about.
Oh yeah, okay. My favorite game probably ever is What Remains of Edith Finch, which was made by like this indie company called Giant Sparrow, and they were owned by Sony, but now I think they're owned by Annapurna Interactive. As a side note, anything that's made by Annapurna Interactive is like the best. I love all of their games. They're a great little indie publisher, and they have really cool games. What Remains of Edith Finch is sort of this like, it's like this sort of magical realism game where you play as this girl who's returning to her childhood house, and she is sort of going into these bedrooms of all of her sort of now deceased family members and sort of reliving their last moments through gameplay. And so when we were kind of talking about before, which was the idea of like experience and emotion through gameplay, that was sort of the first game that had made me really consider that notion. And it was one of the reasons that I definitely wanted to be a game designer after playing that. I don't want to really give that much away of it, but it's just like an incredible experience, and it has not a whole lot to do with violence, which is something that I'm really interested in. Is there a way that we can make a high budget AAA video game that's interesting to the masses that doesn't have any violence in it at all?
It looks really good.
It's great. I would say that playing
How many
for
people
PC,
worked on?
I think it's like
PC?
15 people. Well, you could play for PC or PS4. I say that you would play it. It plays better on PC because it feels better with the mouse and keyboard than it does with a controller. Just like the tactility of the feeling of a mouse and keyboard just like works better than the sort of moving around with your thumbs on DualShock. But I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Wow. 15 people made this game. It looks like insane. Look, the graphics are so good. Yeah.
It's a beautiful game.
Okay.
Definitely.
And then another one that nobody's heard much about. No, we could do the Halo. Why is it? Why Halo 3?
3 ODST?
Yeah.
I love Halo 3 ODST.
To be honest, I've never played all the Halo games, so that's why.
ODST was, and I always got people used to dunk on me at Naughty Dog because I always would say that this was the best Halo, and everyone would be like, "What? Like, what is wrong with you?" But I think ODST is the best Halo because it was the first time that I really sort of felt grounded in the Halo universe. I mean, when you're playing as Master Chief, you're just this brolic 10-foot tall super soldier that just rolls over everything. And the idea that like there's this alien menace that's like kind of like ravaging human sort of settlements and the planets, it feels sort of a little flighty of a concept. I mean, I guess there was in Reach where you had your Spartan squad that was slowly being killed off, but that was all happening through cutscenes. So that doesn't feel really as grounded as in, but when you play Halo 3 ODST, there's like the systems and you're like kind of walking around in a like post-war torn city and like you're just alone, you're trying to find your squad. And, the idea of I had rolled through these grunts like no problem in the first 3 games, and now I'm playing Halo 3 ODST and like a group of 3 grunts is like intimidating. Like that sort of like shift really kind of gives you this sort of an emotional experience of like how scary the Covenant actually are as an entity. And there's sort of like a degree of horror. Also, I guess the structure of it was really interesting because I don't know if when the last time you played it is, but you start as the rookie, and the rookie is just a sort of silent protagonist, but he's going through, it's at the end of the action. You're playing as him at the end of the action after the sort of siege of New Mombasa has happened. And then you're going to all of these different like sort of markers in this like open world map where you put like a chip in your head and you get to relive the memories of your squad that had happened like 7 or 8 hours earlier in a sort of way to try to find out where they are and meet up with them. And so there's like this sort of like weird structure of like a sort of like there's all these little narrative puzzle pieces, and you're kind of going through all these different parts of the war-torn city and then going back and playing the mission of the squad member as it happened 6 hours before. And I just think like the idea of that structure of storytelling was really interesting in a video game. And also just kind of like going, like I said, like the open world aspects of it, as well as just like that sort of fear and the real tacticalness that you have, where you have to kind of just like silently wander with your like silenced SMG and like pick off these like little groups of grunts and have to take them out before they like, tell the brute. And because if you take a brute on with like other grunts and jackals up, you're like definitely gonna die. And so that I love Halo 3 ODST for those reasons.
Now you make me want to play those games.
Oh, great!
I was about to log onto my Xbox and buy the Master Chief collection just because of what you've been saying. I've never played any of the Halo games, so that sounds really great.
Yeah, so if game development doesn't work out, can always work in sales.
Maybe. Put me on the E3 stage.
That's evangelism. Yeah, that's good stuff.
I mean, I could talk about any of these games with that degree of excitement. I love these games.
Now, what about your least favorite game?
I don't think I have a least favorite game. I think every game there's something good about it.
Good about it, yeah.
Like, I mean, I love games that people think are bad. Like, I love Duke Nukem Forever. Like, I love that.
Duke Nukem Forever was amazing, thoe. I mean, seriously.
No,
the problem with that game was the hype. Like, it was hyped for like 20 years almost.
Cares, dude. That makes it even better in my mind.
I mean, that was kind of the whole entire point of Duke Nukem, is that he was all hype in the first place.
Like, Duke Nukem Forever is an incredible game. I think, like even games that people think are bad, there's at least one idea in them that can be incredible. And I think, like, honestly, if you're racked for ideas, and especially because a lot of AAA games can feel very similar, just go through your crate and like open up a game that looks stupid. I remember I found a game that I bought as a joke called Panty Party, where you play as a pair of panties like flying around in the air and like doing all these games. And I got it as a joke for my Switch because I was in downtown Manhattan, and my buddy was buying fight sticks because we wanted to start playing Tekken together, which is also one of my favorite games. I love Tekken. But then I bought this game Panty Party, and I was like, actually, some of these systems are kind of cool. Like they're kind of fun and interesting. So you can find a good game. There's a good game. There's good gameplay in every game. I believe that.
Yeah, 9 out of 10 on Steam. Must be great.
Underrated gem. Underrated gem for sure.
Oh my gosh. Now, what would you say when people are having tough times? What keeps you going?
I think
drugs.
Cut.
Cut the video. I think just the fascination with I just want to take experiences and bring them to gameplay. You know what I mean? Like I think the idea is that by watching movies or playing games, really by playing games specifically, you can kind of relive the experience or live an experience that's not your own, right? Like you can kind of empathize with someone's unique perspective in the world by kind of interacting through their eyes in a video game. And I think I'm really fascinated with kind of bringing that idea. Like I think if we had games that opened up that allowed people to play different experiences than their own, they could become empathetic towards that. And I think if we had a more empathetic world in general, I think that would be a better place. And I know that sounds really grand and ridiculous, but I also do kind of believe that to an extent. I think
like imagine if you had to play a game where you had to play some kind of minority in a society.
Yeah.
And you were constantly, discriminated against, and you had to go through extra things that other people didn't have to go through. I mean, imagine what kind of a story that would tell to somebody playing that game.
And and then there's some of those games that are out there that do that. I mean, anything by like Anna Anthropy, who talks a lot about her experiences, like like going like there's a game Dysphoria, which is great, which talks about her experiences like going on like hormones and stuff like that, and dealing with like being transgender and stuff like that. And I think there's types of games like that are existing and that are helping people learn more about other experiences than their own. And I think that's really what does keep me going. The idea of just like, wanting to bring good experiences to the world. And that's what keeps me going, I think, more than anything else.
What's a great example of that is Senua Hellblade, where he plays the character with the schizophrenia. That's crazy. You put your headphones on, you just hear voices the whole time being positive, negative. Yeah. Oh, that game was an amazing experience.
That game is really dissociating.
Yeah.
It's a total trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Could you imagine though doing that? That'd be a wild ride.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So that's what keeps me going. That and the fact that I would just rather not be. I wouldn't rather be doing anything else, I think. Mm-hmm. Games I love games. If I'm not also, and on a little lighter note, it has given me license to play video games whenever I want, because I can sort of say that I'm researching.
Researching. Yep. And it's not a lie either.
It isn't.
I mean,
it is.
You're learning something from the way that somebody else built a game.
Yeah. I mean, anywhere that you interview, they're going to ask you about the game. I guess that's another thing, going back to it. Anywhere you interview, they're going to ask you about their game and what you thought about it and what you think you can add to it. And to prepare for the interviews that I've had these last couple of weeks, I've been playing a crap ton of games and just, like sitting there with a pen and note paper and writing down things I like and don't like and things that could be expanded on. And I think it gives you license to play video games and think about games all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, like I worked in this IT company, and one of our clients was this adult website, and sometimes we had to like open the website to do stuff, and that was a weird license to have as well.
For sure.
I'm troubleshooting a website issue. I promise.
Yeah, like the guys
Yes,
in
no,
those
of course it's a
websites,
search
they alt
issue.
tab, out of Excel and go back to the website. No, I was working, I swear.
Don't worry that the door is locked. I promise. I'm just doing this. I'm IT solutions.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't in Excel. I promise you, I was testing the website.
I was just testing the website.
Yeah. No big deal.
Oh my.
Now, what would you say to inspire aspiring game developers?
Aspiring game developers. Let me think about this one.
Yeah, that would be the way to end it off.
I think I would recommend going outside and living your life and trying to think about what experience that you can have that's not in the realm of any video game that you can think of, how you can make a game out of it. One time I went to a party and I was like, this is a video game. And I didn't really understand why I thought that, but I was looking around at other people and the conversations and the things that people were doing, and it all felt like a bunch of individual mini games. Like one person like on TikTok, another person like in the other corner of the room like taking shots as this other person was like posing, like one person drinking. I saw on the other corner of the room someone like scratching a quarter and like doing like what are those called that you get at gas stations, the gambling thing, the lottery. They were scratching lottery tickets. They were scratching lottery tickets. And I was like, "This is a
That's
video
a weird
game."
party.
I had no idea why I knew that, but I knew that, and I've been thinking about that as a game concept for a while. So I guess.
Have you ever heard the phrase "to a hammer, everything looks like a nail"?
Yeah. Well, no, but I think I understand what that means.
So when you're a game designer, you see games everywhere in the world. It's interesting that you told that story because I work on ERP systems, and whenever I go to restaurants, all I see is the technology that's driving their supply chain systems.
For sure.
Because that's what I do. So to me, everything looks like an ERP system, right?
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
I thought I was crazy. I was like, everything's a game to me.
Yeah, no, everything
I'm like,
is
that
a
could be a
game,
game. That
definitely.
could be a game. Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
there's game theory in all of those things as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, for sure. Yeah, I mean, like, that I think will make you a better game designer than if you were thinking I would recommend going that way when you're trying to approach stuff, as opposed to just like, I'm going to take this genre and I'm going to combine it. You know what I mean? Which can be really cool. And sometimes there are like great ideas that have come out of that. But, I mean, the game Super Hot came out of like the idea of like bullet time in movies and just like wanting to make that into like a whole game. And like, how do we recreate that experience? Like, go look at other things, whether it's, movies or art, or like going out and hanging out with your friends and trying to just think about like, is there a game here, and what would that look like, and just sort of even think about that as a designer. As a programmer, just pick things that exist in other games and literally try to copy them and make them. I literally I do that every day. I made a radar system that was like the sort of like Call of Duty UAV, and I made that the other day just to learn about how a sort of mini-map system would work, and that was that like is in its own thing makes you feel like you can pick up problems. One thing I don't like about the world that we live in is that there's not that many game programming problems that you can look up online and have the answer to. There's a huge amount of software engineering problems, but there's not going to. I haven't really found that many prompts that would be like, here's X, make Y. It's not, doesn't really exist like that for game programming. So a lot of the time you have to go out and try to make those problems up for yourself. And for me, that is sort of shown itself by me literally looking at game mechanics in other games and saying, how do I do that? And once you know how to do something, you can kind of subvert it in any way you want. Like, you have the sort of, in the case of the radar, where all characters are on a map and a ring around the player based on like your position in the world. You could be like, well, how do I make it so that these characters only show up on the radar under these criteria? And you can sort of subvert and expand on those systems however you want. And then at some point you have a video game. Like that's,
Yeah. Wake
See,
up and you're like, wow.
We got
you're
someone
a
who
gamer.
actually did that then. Because I was talking, I think, 2 weeks ago. Because Andrew Gower used to do that when he was learning game development. Like he would just clone games.
Yeah, for sure.
He made like his own Pitfall and his own Mario and stuff.
Yeah.
In the 90s, right?
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I've never really gone as far as fleshing out a whole clone of a game, but I've definitely remade the wall running mechanic from Titanfall once. Like I've gone through and just made these one thing so I can just kind of go like, oh, that's cool, that's how it works, and then like throw it away. And that's how I guess I flex my game programming chops. But yeah, as a designer, go out into the world, live your life, and try to see of it in terms of gameplay.
Yeah, also like the actual situation doesn't have to be a game. Like you don't need to make a game in a party to have a game related to the experience you had in the party.
No, yeah, it can subvert itself in different ways. I think exactly. Yeah, more or less. I mean, it can be through anything. Just look outside of games and think about how you could design a game out of it in a like more broad sense.
Some people get afraid of that. It's like, live my life. Like, I just want to be inside and make games. It's like, no, go put
To be
yourself out
fair,
there. And,
nowadays there's a ton of stuff happening that could become games.
I love studying geological principles, and I want to build a video game that simulates geographical locations using the hydro erosion cycle, whatever you call that.
Whoa,
right?
that sounds crazy.
Right, but I mean that's the kind of that's exactly
that sounds sick. I'd love that.
I'm interested in geology in that way, and that would be a neat game, right?
There's like, there's.
I mean, I'm sure there's some way you could make a game out of that, right?
For sure.
Like simulating the erosion cycle on a planet by influencing the air pressure and the balance of different kinds of chemicals. You could make like an environmental simulation, right?
No doubt.
I mean, there's I forgot the name of the game, but there's that one that you're like, you start as an asteroid, and then you go growing and become a sun. Like, what's the name of
Is
that
that
one?
everything? Is that what
I've
you're
heard
talking
about that. Yeah.
what?
Is that everything?
It's
No.
super fun. It's weirdly fun. Like absorb other astrological stuff and grow up. Like you become a planet, and then you can like get a moon.
Start as a cloud, and then
Yeah.
I think it is everything.
I think. I mean, yeah. Going back to the point that was made before, you don't really have to necessarily one-to-one create this idea either, right? Like Outer Wilds is a game that's a pretty faithful feeling of what space travel is like, although it's not very realistic at all. Like you play as like an alien and you like shoot a radar gun and can fly out of different planets with ease, but like the feeling that you get out of it, that sort of loneliness in space, is something that I have to imagine is definitely the case when you're an astronaut. I love that.
I couldn't imagine. I need to check it out. I love Outer Worlds. Have you played that one?
Oh yeah, I love Obsidian stuff.
Yeah.
Fallout New Vegas.
The
Oh yeah,
dialogue is
I forgot
so
about
good in
Fallout
that
New
game.
Vegas. Fallout New Vegas is definitely like one of my top 3 favorite games. I love that game. I probably put like 1,000 hours into Fallout New Vegas.
Why'd you love it so much?
a
The
lot.
dialogue, the story.
Dialogue, yeah, the way that these sort of the way the systems interact, where the NCR run across the NCR fighting Kaisar's Legion. Also, like Kaisar is talking about Hegel, like he's talking about like dialectics and like huge philosophy concepts in a video game. I was like, what? Like I was just so surprised to see like philosophy being sort of this video game. Like that was bizarre to me, and I was intrigued.
And anybody who
yeah.
loves system-based game design is going to love Bethesda's games, and Obsidian, as well for that one. But yeah, like Skyrim and Fallout 4, and to a lesser extent, although supposedly I guess the new expansion for Fallout 76 is supposed to hit with like actual content for once. But yeah, I mean, system-driven content. I mean, that's a lot of what that is. I think that that faction interaction was really fascinating. The way that you could choose how the story basically played out by siding with one side over another.
And the writing was tops. I mean, like your companions really did feel like people as much as a game could in 2010. I mean, I felt a serious like vibe and connection with Arcade Gannon and Veronica and the companions that you made. And I especially like I also loved their sort of like the RPG elements of their stats too. Those were great. Those are like the idea that like if you have a low enough intelligence, you can like fool a robot into like letting you past something. Like that is like a pretty great idea. And I remember, and like going back to like the system gameplay, like you can just drink a bunch of alcohol and completely wreck your intelligence score, and then go up and drunk to the robot. You can get through this sort of like speech check. I was like, that's amazing. It like really tickles your fantasy about like what a game can be, and that is probably the most complete idea that, at least in recent memory, of like a really interconnected world, which was so exciting when I first played it, and still is exciting to this day.
That reminds me of Kingdom Come Deliverance. Have you played it?
Oh, I heard this about this game.
So cool. Like I got tired of it because I don't like single player games, but overall it's an amazing game. Like, and it feels so realistic. Like it's a medieval game that you're not the chosen one or the dragonborn or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you have to do a quest line to learn to read.
Oh, really? That's great.
Yeah.
No, but that's cool stuff. Like
I totally
when it makes you feel like you're actually like experiencing stuff and just like the game just putting it out there, like you have to do these things. It's like I can interact with it, and that's when like my favorite games come along. It's like, oh, I could change this whole thing, or I could do whatever I want, or like even other worlds, you can kill everybody in the game, and the game still runs. You can still beat the game, which is really cool to me.
And Kingdom Come, you could, I guess, almost everyone, but you're super weak at the start. Like the whole point's like you're like the blacksmith's son, and they like kill everyone in your city, and like you're one of the few survivors, and you have to run away. And you have nothing. You never knew how to fight. You never held a sword and stuff.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's kind of weird that when you play those games like the Dragonborn, it's like you're expected to be this like all-powerful person, like right away. It's like no. And
it's such a normal trope. Like, oh, you're the chosen one. You're basically God.
But then it's just
Like,
weird
every
because
single
like
game
you
is black
aren't
and
at
white.
first. Yeah, so it's like you're supposed to be this powerful person, but then you're not because you have to be level 1. But then I don't know.
Skyrim
Interesting.
overdoes it
Yeah.
so much. Like you can get so OP in that game.
No, for sure.
Oh, I'm crouching in front of you. You cannot see me.
Now to end it off, we usually like to do like a challenge for the Game.TV students. So ask you to give them a challenge, like either game development or programming wise, whatever you.
I feel like I already kind of covered that with my with the last thing. Just go outside, practice your game programming stuff every day. Try to clone game mechanics, and try to look outside of games in terms of design, and try to bring that sort of those sort of moments of inspiration back to the game engine. Someone who I worked with at Naughty Dog, who is a concept artist, Alex Nianakis, said on her Twitter that like sort of creativity is like wringing out a sponge, And when the sponge is dry, you know, you need to sort of soak up that inspiration. And when you finally are inspired, that's when you're sort of wringing out the sponge and getting all of your ideas out. And so if you're finding yourself sort of uninspired or confused or whatever, go out and put your, you know, step away from the keyboard and go outside and try to like live your life a little bit and see what else, and absorb different facets of information that could, you know, inform how to make better games.
And then it was a pleasure having you on, Jack. It was
it was nice
amazing conversation. Wish you the best, and then also thank you for making Last of Us 2. I can't wait to play that game when it comes out.
Yeah.
And then usually we hand it off the mic to you if you want to do any like shout outs, inspirational, anything you want to do to end it off. And then thanks for coming on.
I guess I'll plug my socials. You can follow me on Twitter at DualShockGenius, which is DualShock the controller and then Genius, all one word. And reach out to me if you have any questions. My DMs are open. And yeah, keep making games.
Well, that's it. Thanks for listening. You can find all GameDev.tv courses at courses.gamedev.tv/courses or in the show notes with a 10% discount. Get started with your game development journey today.